What's going on, everybody? It's your boy KRYPTONIAN SAIYAN here, bringing you guys another review for Chainsaw Man chapter 110. And today we got a big one to discuss because Fujimoto continues to subvert our expectations with his plot twist while continuing to lay down all the foreshadowing for the future of the series. At this point, it's extremely obvious that Mitaka running through the darkness with all those dead bodies is going to be her Denji don't open the door moment, and I'm all for it. Speaking of Denji, our boy continues to show that there's different levels to horny. You have normal horny that normal people feel, and then you have legendary down bad, which is exactly what Denji showcased himself as being today, and as always the humor landed when it was shown to us. Between that and Yoru making a new weapon, we've got a lot to discuss here today, so let's jump into the recap, and as always I'll mix in my thoughts during and afterwards. The chapter opens up with Yoru asking Chainsaw Man if he remembers her, and after she makes a sword out of Yuko's legs, which is now one partial checklist off of our list of prior expectations. We all thought that Yoru was going to make a weapon after Yuko died, and while she's seemingly dead here in this moment, we later learned that Yuko is actually still alive. So the weapon that Yoru made here, while it is strong, I think since Yuko isn't actually dead, the weapon isn't as strong as it could be, but we'll get to that later on. Upon hearing that Yoru believes that Denji should remember her, Denji wastes no time going into horny mode, not looking at her face, but instead looking at her boobs, and then looking at her crotch, and then looking at her whole body outside of the face, which means either Denji thinks that Yoru is a butterface or Mitaka just has an amazing body. However, Denji's horniness doesn't just take center stage with him checking out Mitaka. It also leads to a moment where Denji gets the bright idea to transform back into a human in order to show the girl that he saved that he's not a devil who eats humans and is actually human inside, which gives Yoru the moment to attack Denji from behind. But before her attack can land, Yoshida's octopus tentacle saves Denji from his horny self, leading to a moment where Yoshida calls him out on being so horny that he's hopeless, and we get a funny moment where Denji is screaming about how he lost his opportunity to reveal himself to a really cute girl in a natural way. But at this point, given how horny and desperate Denji is, I'm beginning to call into question whether or not the guy is just so starved for sex that he sees any moment as the right moment to reveal himself. It's then after we see the classmates gossiping about what happened at the school and all the deaths that occurred afterwards after Yuko's rampage that we see the mother of all setups with Mitaka running through the alley filled with all those dead chickens, and the further she runs down this alley, the more chickens she sees, and she can't avoid stepping on them, and before she makes it into the darkness, Yuko wakes up. This is clearly meant to parallel more of what we saw with Denji, but given the relationship between Pochita and Denji, I'm beginning to wonder how dark of a turn it's going to take for Mitaka and Yoru. After Mitaka wakes up, we get a nice set of panels showing her drinking cold water to calm her nerves after this nightmare that isn't actually a nightmare, and instinctually she knows as much, but she doesn't have an idea of what's going on. We get a knock on the door that catches Mitaka's attention. Now what works about all this is that you have this set of paneling. It's between the shading and the transition away from the nightmare sequence and all the horror elements that Fujimoto uses. It almost makes you think that this is just something that might very well be another one of Mitaka's dream sequences, especially once we see that it's someone claiming to be Yuko at the other side of the door. Your first instinct as a reader is to say, wait, we saw Denji seemingly kill Yuko, but the students said that they never found the body. However, like any good manga, until you see the dead body, there's a chance the person isn't actually dead, and lo and behold, the chapter ends off with Yuko standing at the door in a humanoid appearance, but with the features of the Justice Devil itself. Now, we've got a bit to break down even further. On one hand, we clearly saw Denji checking out Yoru / Mitaka, but our boy was speechless. There wasn't one perverted comment, which means Fujimoto's either going for the whole less is more approach, or Denji just decided that if he's gonna simp, he's gonna be a simp with standards, and Mitaka clearly didn't meet those standards, even though technically we saw him simping for Mitaka early on. However, it's worth noting that we're seeing three things being set up here all at once, and if this is done properly, and given Fujimoto's track record, we have no reason to think that this won't be done properly. This could be something that ends with a very high payoff. We're seeing Denji overly horny, which feels like this might still be building on his reaction after he had his whole world crush in Chainsaw Man Part 1. Aki and Power, they were both killed. Makima ended up being the control devil and an absolute monster. Denji has since then become seemingly more sex starved than usual, especially at the end of Chainsaw Man Part 1, which makes me think Fujimoto is saying that when Denji runs away from his problems, problems, he doubles down on his vices, all of his vices. Some people might turn towards sweets, they might turn towards alcohol, they might turn towards drugs, but Denji has simply embraced his inner horny. Which brings us to the second thing, which is we might be starting the transition where Yoshida is used to eventually break Denji from this and force him to grow up and face his problems, because Yoshida saving Denji from his horniness could also be foreshadowing for Yoshida saving Denji from running from his problems. Finally, the third thing that we're seeing here is that Denji and Mitaka are continuing to be parallel to one another, but they're walking down similar paths. Denji will not end the same as Mitaka, and Mitaka will not end the same as Denji. Now, interestingly enough, Yuko survived the encounter with the Chainsaw Man, which I gotta say, that's absolutely cruel. Fujimoto is giving Yuko more fake out deaths than my guy Hiro Mashima did with Fairy Tail and Eiichiro Oda did in the pre-Marineford era of One Piece, but the pattern follows. We're gonna be in for a world of hurt once Yuko does die, because there's potential for Mitaka to get more attached and feel more guilt for Yuko eventually dying before someone says Mashima doesn't kill people, read Eden Zero. That shit is not Fairy Tail. Deaths happen to the main cast, and when they happen, they're permanent. That being said, Yuko living is actually a good way to subvert our expectations while also giving us a sense of foreboding, because we know this is Chainsaw Man. Somebody's gonna die. Another interesting thing to note here is that Yoru is the war devil, one of the four horsemen of devils, but she continues to take L's. Outside of the fight with the class president, she's taken a bunch of L's, and we're seeing more of that crybaby aspect to her character, because when she thinks that Denji doesn't acknowledge her, she gets super pissed off at Chainsaw Man. We're in for one hell of an arc with Yoru as she gains more power, and I think the way that Fujimoto is writing it, Denji is going to be slowly forced to face his problems as a part of his character arc in part 2 of the story, and the closer we get to Denji hitting that moment, we're going to see Yoru grow stronger. It's a dual development. Just as Mitaka begins to give into that darkness that she's afraid of, we're going to see Denji with his head back right. While one person's stock is rising, we're going to see the other person's stock falling, so to speak. I think this reverse mirror situation is working out brilliantly. Denji was lucky to have Pochita as the devil that he merged with, because Pochita, while he did hate humans initially, Pochita grew to love Denji, and Pochita is nowhere near as vicious as Yoru, whereas Mitaka was cursed with one of the four horsemen of devils, Yoru. Denji, his story in part 1 had a lot of lows and had tragic moments, and I think we're going to see something similar with Mitaka, but it looks like Fujimoto is using the art of timing to build things up a little bit more before ripping that band-aid off of Mitaka. Whereas Denji had drastic cuts and they were done in huge chunks, Mitaka is being cut to bits via death by 1,000 cuts. So my chapter question to you guys is, how do you see the parallel of Mitaka and Denji, and why do you think Fujimoto spared Yuko's life for the time being? While you think that over, click here to watch my top 10 strongest characters in Chainsaw Man Part 1 video.